Now, as we begin this, we want to just a quick review. We don't have too far to go because we're just going back a couple of verses here. But we started out with, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And you guys will recall as we talked about those things, we talked about being poor in spirit was to be without any kind of resource in the spirit. So there was no way we could affect our own redemption whenever we had a complete and utter lack of resources. So spiritually we were poor and in need of someone along to provide for us the redemption that we needed. And that is what Jesus brings whenever He comes. And He brings us the kingdom of heaven when He does that. When He redeems us, He brings us into His kingdom at that moment. We have been redeemed. It's a past perfection there. It's something that's already been accomplished whenever you're His. But then whenever you realize just how spiritually poor that you are, when you realize your utter lack of resources to get through this on your own, and you realize that the life that you've been living in sin has caused grief to God, that has caused Him to grieve, and that should bring us to a place where we mourn over sin. So as we get a true picture of who we are without Jesus, it just puts us in this place of humility and humbleness so that we can just bow before Him. We will mourn over sin. It will be something, it should come to a place where we even have tears. That it would cause us to have that much hurt in our hearts that we hurt Him that much. And we mourn over that. But as we come to those places, that brings us to this next verse that we're going to be in. As we realize the depth of all of that, that should lead us to live meek lives. And we're going to really dig into meek and what it is to be meek. Now, I know the worldly idea of that is someone that is mousy and timid, but that is not what biblical meekness is all about. Biblical meekness is about great strength, but under complete control and submission to God. That's what biblical meekness is all about. So we're going to be digging into that. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And we just want to remind you, blessed is a state that you are because God has declared it. You may not feel blessed every day because of the circumstances in your life. You may not think that, well, this is a blessed circumstance. I'm truly blessed as the bill collectors are coming after the bills or different circumstances, or the doctor may be giving you bad news about some test or something that was ran. You may not feel blessed in that moment, but it's not about your circumstances. It's because God Himself has declared you to be blessed. And you're blessed in the heavenlies and blessed in the spirituals. It is a state of being that you are already in. So blessed are the meek. You are already blessed whenever you realize that you need to be meek. And then because of that, you will inherit the earth. He will give you everything that the people in this world strive for and put all their energy into trying to attain. It will be given to you because of who you are in Jesus. So that's what he's talking about whenever he's expressing that. The idea of meek is often translated gentle in most of the more modern translations. But it's a person who is not overly impressed with their own self-importance, but instead is gentle, humbly, lowly, defers to others, and is considerate. It's not someone that's going to be quick-tempered, someone that's going to be forceful and demanding their own way, not someone that is quick to receive some kind of slight, whether it's real or imagined. You're not looking to see what harm someone else has done to you and then responding in kind. It's the person that takes all of that and it's just water off of a duck's back. It's the person that doesn't respond to those things, but in every way is gentle and kind. That's the person that God is talking about, that they will be blessed. So we're going to go over a few things about what meekness is. In the Hebrew, really digging into meekness, it describes someone that is lowly and pious, has a modest mind, and prefers to bear injuries rather than return them. You've probably all known somebody like that from time to time, somebody that doesn't matter what someone else says about them, they usually have something nice to say in return. That person is truly living what it is to be meek in the instant there. It's not only the opposite of pride, but of stubbornness, fierceness, and vengefulness. It's the opposite of all of those things. It is not being self-willed, it's being submitted to the will of God. That's what, whenever we were trying to get, I know we got a lot of mechanical things I want to deal with before we really get into the heart of it here. But we want to get this idea. The meek person will not expect to always be treated with respect and reverence. Now, how many of us, whenever we go someplace, expect to be treated with respect? Maybe not reverence, but at least with respect. I mean, that's just common courtesy these days, right? But most of the time, we're not treated that way. It's really hard to have people that treat people with a level of respect. You know, and I've talked to some younger folks about it, and they're very much about, well, respect has to be earned. Well, if you're going to go that route, that's a two-way street, right? And how we deal with it. But someone that's truly meek would not respond to that at all. Someone that is truly trying to live this out in the biblical stand of it, they're not going to respond to the disrespect that you get from the cashier at Walmart or from whoever else it is that you run into in your day-to-day business. You just won't respond to those things. You'll just accept it and go on. The person that is meek will do their job, whatever it is, because he knows that God has placed them there. So that person is not going to always be seeking for the better job. It's not always going to be reaching and grabbing for more. That person is going to say, God has put me here for a reason. God will lift me up in due time. So I'm going to do my very best that I can here so that I'm a good witness for my Lord. And wherever God has planted me, wherever He has put me. That's that whole idea. That's the idea that of Joseph whenever he was put into slavery and then very quickly rose to prominence in the house of Potiphar, because he wasn't always self-seeking. He always did what was best for whoever was in charge. He did his job well. He did it thoroughly. But he also did it because he was trying to be a good witness for his God. And so God elevated him, right? And that's the same kind of idea that we want to get here. Now we're going to talk about the perfect example about all these things later, but Joseph's not a bad example either. It's also patience and reception of injuries. Whenever someone does something to harm you, it's not lashing out in return or I'm going to pay back. It's always keeping in mind that it is God Himself who will vindicate. It is God Himself who will bring back and repay whatever is done. We don't judge things perfectly. We don't know every circumstance. Have you ever been in a situation, this is the thing that comes to my mind here, been in a circumstance where someone said something harsh to you and you responded in kind, but then you found out later that they had some terrible circumstance going on in their life, and they were really struggling in that moment, and they weren't really speaking to you. They were really speaking more about their issue, whatever that might have been, and then you just absolutely felt like a jerk because of the way you handled the situation. Is there anybody in here besides me that's ever done that? Okay. That's kind of what you're talking about. So we can't judge things perfectly, so it's the person that's going to just say, all right, they said something mean to me, but I don't know what's going on in their life, so I'm just going to receive that. And if they really meant it evil towards me, then God's going to handle it. And if they were just having a bad day and they're having some bad circumstances, God bless them and help them out in that. It's someone that's got that kind of attitude about it, someone that can always look and see the best for others in that circumstance. You see what I'm saying about meekness is not this timid, mousy thing. Meekness is a great deal of self-control and strength that's in the Lord. Life completely submitted to God in a way that you're not giving evil for evil, right? In a way that you're showing good to people that treat you badly. These are all principles that Jesus continues to teach as we go throughout the Sermon on the Mount. As you go through and read the rest of it, these are all things He goes on in more detail about. But He's talking about these characteristics of the kind of person that has truly been redeemed, truly been born again, that's truly a follower of His. These things in the Beatitudes are all characteristics, brothers and sisters, that we need to be exemplifying in our lives. That's why I wanted to go over these, and I wanted to go over them in great detail, because I want us to realize that we may have a few of these down, but maybe we don't have all of them down. And I'm not judging anybody here, because I got my own issues. But we need to realize just the kind of person it takes to be able to live in the world that we live in today and still be a good, strong witness for Jesus. Now, all of those things were really the connotations that come out of the Hebrew idea of the word that is translated here for meek. The Greek word that is translated for meek really leans more towards the idea of having an animal, say a powerful horse, but completely under control of the rider, right? That's where you get the idea of this strength under control developed out of that same the same phraseology that they've got there. So you have this horse that can run incredibly fast, or can pull heavy wagons, or pull a plow in a field, can do all of this work that a human being cannot do. But they are completely under control of whoever has control of the reins, right? So it's the same way with us. We have, because of the gift of the Holy Spirit, because of the redemption that we have in Jesus Christ, we have given to us His authority here on earth. And we have great strength and power here on earth in the spiritual that we don't recognize most of the time in our lives. But brothers and sisters, to really see that and to have it become an effect in our lives, that has to be completely submitted to the will of God. That power and authority is not yours to do with as you please. It was given to you as a loan, but so you could do God's will in this world, not to do your will. So that's why we need to be careful about how we use these things and how we say these things and how we deal with these things. Because it all comes back to, are we completely submitted to God? Now, those are some things that meekness is. Proverbs 16:32 says, "Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city." In the Proverbs, it's better to be that patient person than someone that is volatile. It's better to be someone that has control of self. That takes more strength to be in absolute control of yourself than it does to conquer a whole city. Because you could just let your anger and all of your hate and rage, just let it run free, right? And kill people and conquer a city. It can be done. But to bring all of that under control and subjection doesn't mean you don't have those things. And now we'll get into that here in a minute. You still experience those emotions, but do you control them? Do you have the reins on that? And then are you going to give that control over to God? So meekness is not being a coward. It is not a lack of conviction. It's not being complacent in everything in our life. It's not being timid. It's not being indecisive or wishy-washy. A meek person is gentle and mild in their own cause, though you can be a lion in the cause of God or defending others. So it's just like Jesus. Whenever they were coming against Jesus, He didn't say anything. He just took it. But whenever they came against God, or they were treating other people bad, then He started to rise up against it. You get the whole idea whenever He built the scourge out of the cords and He drove out the money changers, right? They were disrespecting the house of God. The house that was meant for prayer and meant for all people, they had turned it into a place to steal from people. So He drove them out. Whenever the Pharisees got mad at Him for healing people on the Sabbath day, He come down on the Pharisees and He rebuked them for their attitudes because He was doing good and making people whole. So He defended those people that He blessed in that way. And brothers and sisters, that's the same way. If we're truly going to live that way, we don't rise up to defend ourselves. We rise up to defend those that are defenseless. We rise up to say something about little babies that are being aborted all over our nation. We rise up against that because that is evil. We rise up against the evil in this world and how people are rejecting God and how people disrespect the name of Jesus everywhere that they go. And this is one thing that's always astounded me, how people can deny that there is a God, deny that Jesus even existed, and yet still His name is the name they want to use to swear by. You think about that. It's the cuss word, it's the thing. And it's because the enemy is right there trying to use it and trying to dilute it and trying to change it and make it something that it's not. So the enemy is always at work and always in people's lives trying to influence people. And brothers and sisters, we need to rise up against that and be praying against it specifically. Meekness is not weakness. Although they rhyme, they're not the same thing. Meekness is not vindictive. It does not retaliate. It is not selfish. Meekness is not passive acceptance of everything that's going on around you, all the evil practices of the world. That is not what being meek is all about. Now, we've looked at what meekness is. We looked at what meekness is not. Now, how are we meek in our relationship to God? How do we bring ourselves to that place where we're living that way. That's taking every bit of all of the passion and the strength that you possess, all of the anger and the fear and the rage and whatever it is that you're experiencing, and you're giving that to God and asking Him to control it for you. You are surrendering every bit of yourself. I talked about all the bad things, but you could say your love, your compassion, all of the things that drive a human being to do the things that human beings do. All of those emotions and feelings. It's not denying that they're there. It's having them in correct alignment with the will of God. Completely submitted, completely under His control. That way He is the one that is working through us in those circumstances. That's truly what that means. It's an attitude of heart that brings us in complete subjection to God through the control of the Holy Spirit. Meekness will realize that God is the ultimate judge. God is in control. God is always good, and He is always on the throne. So whatever circumstances we're facing in life, we realize that God is bringing us to that for a reason. He's bringing it to it so that He can show the world what it looks like whenever someone of His walks through it. Think about that for just a minute. Whenever you're a child of His, sometimes He will use you as an example for other people to see what it is whenever a follower of Christ has to walk through these circumstances, so that you will have an example to follow. And I've heard many stories, just here in the last few weeks, of people who have had to endure things in their life and have questioned and wondered, why have I had to go through this? And now, having already walked through that, they can look back now and see the opportunities that they have had along the way to be able to share of the grace and the goodness of God as they went through those times with other people that are coming along and following on that path behind them. For whatever reason, things have been thrown in their way, these terrible things that they're having to wrestle with. But someone has gone before, and they can show you that you can do it. You can overcome by the power of God in your life if you are willing to submit yourself to Him. So that meek person is someone that realizes that God is in absolute control, and so I'm going to give God control of not only my circumstances, but the passions that rule my life. And that way I can respond appropriately in the right moment. Psalm 31:14 says, "But I trust in you, Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hands. Deliver me from the hands of my enemies, from those who pursue me." The psalmist was just laying it all out there, trusting that God would handle every circumstance. Now, the thing that really gets us about meekness, as opposed to the first two of the Beatitudes, is whenever we're realizing that I'm looking at myself and I'm recognizing my spiritual poverty. I'm looking at myself and I realize that I need to mourn over the way that I have acted and behaved and treated the blood of the Son of God that was given on the cross. That should bring me to mourning. But now when we're dealing with meekness, we're talking about our relationship with other people. Not only that, but now they are looking back at us and making those judgments. Now, how many of us can say of yourself, I am a sinner? Anyone in here ever said that to yourself? I'm a sinner. I mean, it's really quick, I'm a sinner saved by grace, right? It's only by the grace of God that any of us are here. It's only because of His infinite mercy shown to us on the cross by the sacrifice of Jesus that any of us receive salvation. So it's not anything of us. Ain't none of us going to be bragging about that. It's about what Jesus has done for us. But then you can say that about yourself, but how many of us really like it when someone says, you're a sinner? You ever had anybody do that? You're sinning. What you're doing now is sin. How do you respond to that whenever someone else points at you and says that? I think it's a natural response is to rise up against it and say, well, who are you to be pointing at me? You also are a sinner, right? You rise up in self-defense. how we respond when other people look at us, whenever we're taking that upon ourselves. See, once again, that's where we're going to get into looking at what Jesus had to say for us. Jesus, whenever they accused him of things, he didn't fight back because he was zealous for Jesus. He was zealous for the honor of the Father. And he did that to live an example for you and I, so that we're not zealous for self, but we're zealous for God. So if people say something bad about us, we have to say, you may be right, but I know the one that can fix it. I know the one who can, by his grace, change all of that. I know the one that is the only one that can fix my life and your life and everyone else's life. Let me tell you about my Jesus. See, if we could respond in that meek manner, in that humble manner, just how much further would we be able to get in our witness as we share those things? Jesus himself is the perfect example of meekness. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 20, Peter writes, "But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. And when they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly." See, right there, Peter is laying out perfectly what we are expected to do if we're going to truly live in this meekness that the Bible calls for. Jesus had all power and authority to do whatever he wanted to do. But he was so submitted to the will of the Father while he was here in the flesh to live this example for you and I, so that we would be able to see what he has done and be able to follow after him. He didn't rise up and fight back. Brothers and sisters, how hard is it for us to hold back in that moment whenever we want to be vindicated, when we want people to see that we've done something or we are something? Whenever we hear those derogatory remarks thrown at us, we have to be able to handle those in a meek manner. In Matthew 11:28, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This idea of the yoke was something that would have been very familiar to the people that were hearing it in his day. But for us, maybe not so much. So I just want to use this as an example. Some people might have seen this, but they had the big wooden yoke that fits over the head of the oxen whenever they're pulling the plows and being used for as beasts of burden and all that. But what they would do is they would take an older animal that was trained and knew what to do, knew how fast to move, knew all of it, and they would take the younger animal and put with them. So the older animal, by keeping the pace and doing everything that animal had been taught, would then teach the younger animal how it needed to pull the wagon, how it needed to pull the plow, how it needed to do everything. So when Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you," what he's saying is come alongside of me, yoke yourself up to me, and I will show you how to do this. I will show you how to live this life. I will be this example for you. You walk with me, beside me, and I will pace you out, and everything will work out fine, because you are going to be walking in my steps. You guys see that whenever he says that he wants to be so joined to us. He says, "Take my yoke upon you." He is asking us to submit ourselves to him, and then he will make sure that we are living these things out. All of these characteristics in the Beatitudes, those will come out the closer we walk with Jesus. The closer we are to him, the more like him we will become. And the more like him that we become, the more likely we're going to be exhibiting these things that the world is going to see, and they're going to say, "Wow, that's different than anything else that I have ever seen." And I want a part of that. I want to know what it is to have that kind of peace and that kind of joy in these circumstances that are going on all around us, because that person is so trusting in God to get them through whatever comes that they don't have fear of the future. They have nothing to worry about, because everything is in God's hands. Brothers and sisters, how nice would it be if we all lived our lives that way every day? Anybody in here experience fear over the circumstances that this world is in right now? You watch the news and pay attention? I think every one of us at some point has got that little hiccup in your throat wondering, well, who's going to start shooting the nuclear missiles first? How is society going to collapse? Is the dollar going to collapse? Is the world falling down around our ears? Boy, watching the news doesn't pay these days, does it? But Jesus said, you don't have to worry about all of that. All you need to do is walk with me. Take my yoke upon you, and I will give you rest. He will take care of those burdens. Brothers and sisters, those are never for us to carry. Those are for Him. Now, meekness is not a reflection of weakness. And I want to just use this example. I mentioned it earlier, but in John chapter 2, starting in verse 13, when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And in the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." This was from the prophet Zechariah in Zechariah 9:9. "The zeal for your house will consume me." There is a time whenever a response of some sort. Okay? Jesus did that. Whenever the house of God, whenever it was not being used properly, whenever people were being turned away because they didn't have the right coin or they didn't have the right sacrifice or they didn't have anything, whenever people were being rejected and kicked out of the temple grounds, Jesus reacted in a way that showed that He was zealous for God. He was zealous for the hearts and the souls of the people around Him. Brothers and sisters, there is a time to express a righteous anger. But I don't know about you guys, but I don't trust me to make that judgment. So I have to, if I'm going to have that, I have got to wait until He says it's time. I have got to wait until God moves in that way. So there is a place for it. And like I said, all of these things, being meek is not denying that we have this within us, that we have anger and frustration, that we have all this other. All we're saying is that we are submitting it to the Father, and He is going to be the one in charge. Because if you look at Matthew 21:5, Jesus did that, but He also did this. "See, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." That word gentle is meek. It's the same word as translated meek in the Beatitudes. He is meek because He is on this donkey. He's not on a horse. He's not on this war horse of any sort. He's not having any pomp and circumstance around Him coming up. He's just kind of easing in on a donkey. And so He's humble in that way. And so Jesus, He knew when to be meek. He knew when to not self-aggrandize. But He also knew when it was appropriate to let His anger be expressed. Brothers and sisters, God is the only one that can do that perfectly. So, how many times have you and I expressed our anger in a way that shamed us later? We don't have to start counting them up. I don't know if we got enough fingers and toes. How about you guys? Whenever we just allow ourselves to make those decisions, whether it's dealing with your family, whether it's dealing with your children or your spouse, whether it's dealing with your coworkers or whatever it is that you're dealing with, we're not doing that most of the time in a way that is godly. I want to say 99.99% of the time that is not going to be godly, and maybe more than that. Because God doesn't want us to treat those people that way. He wants us to treat them in a way that is going to draw them to Him and not drive them away. So how can we tell if we're meek? Anybody in here have an idea? Are you meek or not? How can we tell if we're meek? Are you mean in your treatment of others? Anybody in here ever been mean? If there's an absence of gentleness in your treatments of others, you need to stop and pay attention. How harsh are you in dealing with other people? Are you harsh in your words? Are you harsh in your actions? Do you treat other people harshly? That would be the first thing that say that, you know what? You're not really living a meek life. How about grasping? Are you always trying to get yours to make sure that people recognize you for what you've done, that you're always trying to get the promotion or get recognized or trying to get people to pay attention to you? Are you self-serving in that way? If you are, you're not being meek. That's not the way He would have us be. How about vengeful? Are you known as someone that you don't cross, that you will get them back if they cross you in some way? Right? If you're known as that kind of person, you're not being meek. How about uncontrolled? If rage fills you from time to time, whether you're in traffic and some jerk cuts you off or pulls out in front of you and your wife has to slam on the brakes and you end up with your face pressed against the windshield because you didn't wear your seatbelt. Nothing specific, but if rage enters in, then you've got a problem and it needs to be dealt with. Brothers and sisters, we need to stop and think about how we behave. And are we going to be the kind of people that God wants us to be? To be meek, He says, you will inherit the earth. And I really struggled with that, and I thought about that quite a bit, because I was trying to think of what was He really getting at here, and how can we express this as we look at all of these things. I've talked a lot about what meek is and what meek isn't. Talked about some of the characteristics of someone that's going to be meek and someone that is not. And we've mulled this all over, and we've got this idea in our minds. I believe we've got that pretty well established now. But if you're living this life, if you are truly living in this meekness that Jesus is talking about here in the Beatitudes, He says you will inherit the earth. So if you're going to inherit the earth, what does that mean? I mean, there's people all over this world that have tons of money, and they're buying up chunks of this world faster than we can even think. There's corporations and businesses that have influence, and they get with the politicians, and they change laws, and that puts the little person like you and I in a place where, how are we ever going to have anything? And what was the thing that I was hearing not too long ago? The World Economic Forum, they were talking about you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Well, if the world is all setting out to make sure that we never have anything, how can Jesus say that we're going to inherit the earth? It's because whenever you're truly living a meek life, your perspective changes. And you are so much happier with what God gives you than anything that you can scratch and scrounge and scrape for yourself. The world is going to be scrounging and scraping for things that are going to die in the fire that's to come. It will be destroyed. And Revelation 21 says there will be a new heaven and a new earth. Brothers and sisters, what He's talking about is not just the here and now, because I want to get into the here and now a little bit, but in the end, there's going to be a whole brand new earth. And brothers and sisters, if we have lived the kind of life that He wants us to live because of the redemption that He has blessed us with, we will be in that kingdom and we will see that new earth. That's part of the inheritance that He has for us. But in the here and the now, if you know someone that truly lives a meek life, how satisfied are they with wherever they're at? Whenever your life is not given to scrounging and scraping for more, trying to make more money. They talk to some of the richest people in the world, and how much money is enough money? Just a little bit more. That's what that's said. That's kind of the cliche phrase. How much money is enough money? A little bit more. And it will always be a little bit more. But brothers and sisters, if we're not scrounging and scraping and clawing for the things that this world wants, and we can learn to be content where God has placed us, how much more satisfied are we with the things that are around us? The glories of what God has given us, the joys of seeing the children play and you hear their little voices carrying on, watching the animals in the fields and the sun shining through the leaves in the trees. All of God's creation is all around us every moment of every day. And when you're not worried about scraping and scrounging for the things of this world, you can truly be content with the stuff that's around you. And how much joy and freedom does that give you whenever you don't have to have a new car, when you don't have to be saddled with the payments, and you don't have to have all the things that go with that, and you don't have to have the biggest house, and you don't have to have a boat to park in the garage that you never have time to take to the lake because you're working to make the payments on. The freedom of being debt-free and just enjoying the world around you. That, to me, is an inheritance. I don't know about you guys, but it seems like that life, that ain't so bad. And if we're going to live in that kind of way, in that kind of contentment, in meekness, having established who we are in Jesus, being redeemed through His spiritual resources, having a proper attitude about sin, and then living a life completely submitted to Him. It's where we come to this place where you understand what it is to live blessed every day. And I think this is where we're going with all of these Beatitudes. We're going to get to that place where we're going to see Jesus has laid it out for us step by step how it is to live a life that is truly blessed, regardless of your circumstances, because He has taken care of everything.